God is the one who brings order to chaos. He provides purpose to a place that has no form. He brings life to that which is empty. That's what this is saying. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So if you're anything like me, what you get out of this is this sort of picture of loneliness, emptiness. There's nothing else except God. He's not lonely, but if I were there in that moment, it's lonely. But I also get the distinct impression that earth and God are separate, that he's looking at everything, observing everything, right? Not that he's in everything. And this is very important because we're getting two very strong statements from God. One of his statements is, I am only one God. There are no others. And in fact, Deuteronomy 6:4 is a verse that the Hebrews have made sort of central to their faith. It's the most important one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, he is one God, or something like that. So we're hearing that all these other ancient cultures that worship multiple gods, they're wrong. There's only one. But there's something else being said here, because he's saying, all those cultures, which would include our own, by the way, that think that matter is eternal, yeah, they've got that wrong, because I'm the eternal one. All those other cultures that think that I and the matter are one thing, yeah, they've got that wrong, because I'm separate from that. So God, he is here making very clear statements about his nature, that he is all-powerful, that he is completely separate from the created stuff. And the implication, of course, would be if he's creating everything out of nothing, that he is also eternal, that he is outside of time itself. Now, I'm going to spend just a minute more here because it's fascinating. If you look at almost all the translations here, you're going to find that they're going to look just like what you see here on the screen. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, period. But the study Bible for the Catholics, which I think is the New Jerusalem Bible, does not translate it this way. And they are not alone. They didn't go changing the Bible. What happened is there's a really interesting nuance of this Hebrew language, and there are a lot of Hebrew scholars that debate the right way to translate it. So the concept of ex nihilo, which is out of nothing in Latin, the concept that God created ex nihilo is all over the Bible, and I'll pop up some scripture verses related to that, like Colossians and Hebrews and Psalms. It's everywhere. So no matter how you translate it, the Bible supports that God created out of nothing. But there's this added component that's just, to me, so fascinating. It adds nuance of meaning. If this is translated to be, in the beginning, when God was creating the heavens and the earth was without form and void, then this verse cannot be used to support ex nihilo, because this verse is saying that the stuff was here and God was hovering over the stuff, and then everything else that happens afterwards is God creating where the stuff is. But what does that mean? Why is this interesting? And why is it actually, in my opinion, I think it's a good way to translate it? Well, because what it's saying is that God is the one who brings order to chaos. He provides purpose to a place that has no form. He brings life to that which is empty. That's what this is saying. We have this picture of chaos and purposelessness and emptiness and loneliness, and then God's going to come in and fill it up. And there's a very spiritual message there. He will take our lives and he will give it purpose. He will take what is empty and lonely within us and he will fill it with life and joy from him. And he's going to take what is chaotic and disorderly in our life and help us order it and make sense out of it, because he's the life bringer. So not only do we have this amazing spiritual message, but I do just want to add this little side note here, because God is communicating to us about him. And in the process of communicating to us about him, he is basically telling all these other nations back in the ancient Israelite days that worshiped other gods that their story is all wrong. You see, there's this ancient story about how the other gods in Sumer, Akkadian, Babylon, all of them, how they created the earth. And there was this idea that there was this primordial chaos, this primordial water that was chaos. And this was Tiamat. So this is the Babylonian myth. And then Marduk, the king of the gods, basically comes in and slaughters her and then divides her into heaven and earth. And what we see here instead is God just quietly hovering over what he has created as he prepares to give order to it. And he's saying, this is not a case where we have warring gods. We're not having violence and murder. We don't have multiple gods doing the work. And you know what? It's just like, no, Marduk is not the one. You guys have it all screwed up and wrong. To me, what I see here is that from the very beginning of this chapter, the beginning of the Bible, God is not just giving us important lessons about who he is. He's also saying, don't forget, your culture is lying to you. All right. I could spend a long time here. There's actually a whole lot you can get out of this, but we're going to keep going. So the next thing is God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. Notice that evening and morning. And then light and day, or light and darkness, are given names. They're given purposes and functions to govern certain times of the day. So it backs up what's going on there in Genesis chapter 1. If you translate it a little bit different, Genesis verse 1, if you translate it a little bit differently to give the idea of order out of chaos, now you come down here and you see God ordering the light and the darkness and giving it purpose and function. There's more though, because God speaks, and here we have light. Remember what I said about how God is outspokenly attacking the other culture and saying the other culture is wrong? Well, you might find it really fascinating that every single thing that is called out in the creation passage is something that has some corresponding God in ancient cultures. There is a God of light. I think it was On in Sumer. Sometimes the god of light was corresponding with the god of the sun. Sometimes it wasn't. Depends on the culture. Their pantheons change and things change names. And that's a little outside the scope of what we're talking about. But the reason I'm bringing it in is just to mention that not only is God going to teach us something here about who he is, but he's also teaching us something about who the other gods are not. Because these other people are worshiping the personification of light, the personification of the sun, and so on. They've got fertility goddesses, and they have gods of the moon, and so on. You get the picture. Everything that God creates is something that they have in their pantheon of gods. And God's saying, you guys aren't worshiping God. That would be me. You're trying to worship some created thing. I created that thing with just my words. So it's pretty potent stuff. Now for us, where we're not really, enthralled to worshiping Marduk, that's not our problem, right? There's other lessons that we can get out of this, but I think that we can appreciate where the ancient Jews would have been hearing the point hit home over and over again. This pantheon is wrong. There is only one God, and he created everything. So the next thing is that God is creating with his words. He says, let there be, and there is. So that suggests to me that God values communication, and in fact that the universe itself could be a communication from him. And if you go to Romans chapter 1, you'll find there that Paul is saying that people have no excuse to be atheists, because from the very beginning, God has written into the very universe itself his divine attributes, the fact that he is eternal and omnipotent. That's what's being said there. So the next thing I want to point out is actually Isaiah 55:11. So we obviously see that God's word is powerful here, right? Well, what's amazing about that is that is more than just, oh yes, he's super powerful and he can create things with nothing but his words. It actually means that when he speaks promises, they have power. That when he wants something to happen, it will have power. It allows us to trust him. So let's look at Isaiah 55:11. So shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. So basically, if I say it, it's gonna happen, just like in creation. So as we're reading through the rest of Scripture and we see God said something would happen, we can trust him. And sometimes what God said is a good thing, like this wonderful thing is going to happen to you. And sometimes it's a warning. If you go down this path, problems will come. Those are God's words. And his words contain power, and they will accomplish what he intended them to accomplish. So we need to take heed and not just disregard what he has to say. All right, so let's move on. God said that the light was good. Here we have an interesting thing. Every single day, we're told that what God created is good. And if you've read ahead to day 2, you know that in the version of the Bible that I'm looking at right now, it doesn't say that. But there are some translations, like the ones used by the Orthodox Church, that do say it was good. So on the one hand, you're going to find all sorts of rabbinic literature that discuss the fact that it's missing from that day, and there's some really interesting theories that I love. On the other hand, maybe it's as simple as a piece of scroll tore off and ink blotted or whatever, and it got missed because in the Orthodox Bible, it absolutely says it was good. So that's a little academic point. Let's talk about what this means. Why do we care that God says that the light was good? Well, if all he said was that the light was good, we probably wouldn't care all that much. What matters is that he says everything is good. Every single day, everything he creates is good. And then you get to the very end, and he says, and it was very good. Well, that's pretty potent stuff. First of all, ancient Israelite people, they'd be looking at that pantheon of gods in every single country, and those gods, what they created was not always good. These were capricious gods. They could not be trusted. There were gods that were the personification of pestilence or disease, right? There were gods that brought natural disasters, and there were others that were, basically the goddess of war. So it was very common back then to have gods that could not be trusted, and in fact had to be bargained with. So you would bribe them with gifts and so on. But that's not the God of Genesis 1. He's saying, I'm not like that at all. I'm good. How do we know that? Because everything he made was good. Every single day, every single thing that he made was good. Therefore, he must be a good God. And in fact, Psalm 136, I think it is. Yep, Psalm 136 ties in the concept of God's steadfast love and his good nature with creation, sort of repeating out the things that happen on creation and saying his steadfast love endures forever. And therefore, the ancient Israelites were making that connection between the fact that everything God made was good and him being a good and loving God. All right. Let's move on to here. This is day 4. So we're looking at the lights in the heavens. Let them be for signs and seasons and days and years. And what I see here is that God is saying, I created the sun and the moon and the stars. These things that the ancients would have looked at and worshiped. He's saying, I made them. And I think for us, it can help us sort of get an idea of how absolutely immense God is. Just think about it. Think about the giganticness of the universe. We can't even begin to fathom the number of galaxies and all the different things that are out there. It's amazing. And God made it all. He spoke it into existence. That should give us pause. He's huge. And I don't mean huge in a physical sense, but huge in a pure power sense. And of course, the ancient Israelites would have realized these things aren't gods. I wanted to point out again, God is giving them purpose, right? So he gave them purpose, signs and days and years. So marking the passage of time like a calendar, but he also gives them a purpose here, saying you're going to rule over the day and the night. You'll separate the light from the darkness. So all of these celestial bodies have a purpose, just like everything else has a purpose. All right, so then we get to this fun one. God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So he creates them, and he creates the sea creatures. Here we go. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas and let birds multiply on the earth. So God is now commanding them to be fruitful and multiply. He says it here. And then he also says it again on day 6 when he's talking to people. What I find particularly powerful about this is that most ancient religions tended to have their fertility goddess be one of their most powerful goddesses. And you needed to keep her happy because you wanted to have crops and you wanted to have marriage that was happy and you wanted to have children and you wanted to have a future, right? And here's what God's saying. He said, I already gave the command to be fruitful and multiply. It's done. I already did all that. Why would you go worship some god like Ishtar when I already did all the hard work? It's finished. So it's again a slap in the face of the ancient pantheon. For us, I see something else here. God's giving them free will. He loves the fact that he's created creatures that move according to their own will. They swim and fly where they want to. And the beasts are the same, and then later we're the same. So now we know that God is not only all-powerful and eternal, and he creates order out of chaos, and he fills our void and all of that, but he also he's a communicator. And he believes in freedom, and he's good. These are amazing attributes. We learn a lot about who God is here. So then he creates the animals, and then he creates people. And we'll pause here for a quick second. Again, whole books on this subject. I really can't even begin to dive into it, but I will give you some taste and perhaps a suggestion of what I think matters for us. All right, so here we have God saying, let us make man or people in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and so on. So God creates man in his own image and he creates them as male and female. So the first most obvious point people want to jump to is God created both males and females in God's image, and he didn't create anything else. He created males and females in his image. And I think you can extrapolate a whole lot of cultural, counterculture stuff from that. But that's actually not where I want to focus. I want to focus on this concept of the image of God. To be made in the image of God doesn't mean that we're made to look like him, because we already know in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, that God is spirit. He didn't make us look like him. So there must be some other way in which we are his image. There are pretty much 2 schools of thought on that. And one of those is that we are essentially his proxies, his representatives on earth. Notice that we are given dominion and authority over all the livestock. And up until now, God has been the one acting with dominion. Well, now that dominion is given to us. So in that sense, we are sort of representing him on earth. If you look at all of creation as God's temple, the place where he is to be worshiped, and we are his image, then we are the image within the temple of him, which is an interesting perspective. I don't think you can stretch that metaphor too far without having some theological issues. The other concept is that as God's image, we are made to be like him, like to have similar attributes or characteristics that God already has. Now, I say it's kind of both, because how can you have dominion and authority? How can you represent God unless he's given us the attributes to let us do that? So I say it's really both. He's given us a purpose and a function of representing him. And in order to accomplish that, he's made us a particular way. We're special. How are we special? Well, let's look back and see what he's done. He's a communicator. Oh yeah, we're communicators too. He created. So do we. He brought order out of chaos. Hey, sometimes we do that. I'm not always very good at that, but most of the time we try to do that. What else has he done? He's good. Well, we can be good. We're not always good. We certainly can usually distinguish what is good most of the time, but there's something wrong there. That whole goodness piece, I think we all know something's wrong there. We're not doing a good job of imaging him there. But you get what I'm saying. Like, there are certain characteristics that he has that we also have because he gave him to us. Now, you'll hear some people promoting heresies online, saying things like, we are all little gods, or we will all become gods, or we are made of the stuff of God. I've even heard people say things like, we all have the DNA of God in us. All of those things are heretical and anti everything that we just looked at. Because what we just looked at in Genesis 1:2 is that God is spirit. Therefore, he's not material, and he is completely separate from the material world. So no, we are not made of the same stuff. And we also have learned that God created us. So we certainly aren't on the same par as him. And I want to bring us into this concept. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine that you're in the bathroom and you're looking in the mirror and you see yourself. Now, when you move, your image moves. And when you talk, your image talks, although you don't hear anything. And if you blink, your image blinks. You get where I'm going with this. What you see is a really good representation of yourself, but that's all it is. It does not have everything that you have. You aren't made of the same stuff. Like, it's not flesh and bone. And it can't make noise, and it certainly doesn't have your thoughts, but it looks a lot like you and it behaves a lot like you. Oh, but it has no ability to move without you. If you leave, it's gone completely. It has no life outside you. Now let's take this a step further and think about what happens if you turn the lights off. Where's the image go? You're still there. But the image is dim or gone depending on how much light is left in the room. And this is what I like about this particular metaphor, because if we are imaging God the way our reflection images us, we're made of different stuff and we are limited and we have no life outside of him. And even if he is present, if the light that illuminates our very souls disappears, we can't image him. So that's what's going on with that whole we're not always good thing. And certainly we haven't gotten to Genesis 3 yet where we talk about the fall, but I think you get where I'm going. Now let's look at John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So the Word here is Jesus. There's a whole lot of theology packed up in here that I just don't have time to go into. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So first of all, we're told that Jesus is the Word of God that was doing the creating. So now we have God creating through his Word. Oh, and that's Jesus. It's pretty cool stuff. But the most important thing to hone in on there is that he brings life, and that life is light to us. So if we are intended to image God, but we are in darkness and we are failing, then Jesus illuminates us. He brings that light in, and we can begin to image God as we were intended to, which was never to be God himself, but to reflect him and his goodness, to represent him to the rest of this world, to conduct ourselves in the same way that he would conduct himself were he here. All of those things that we fail at all the time, Jesus can help illuminate our souls so that we can do a better job of that lighting. There's a whole lot there, but I don't want to take too much longer, so we're going to keep going. God blesses them. He tells them to be fruitful and multiply. Now he gives every plant to the beasts of the field and the people to eat. And why did he do that? Well, he's given everything a purpose, right? Up until now, everything is designed a purpose. And that was the one thing that there really doesn't seem to be any actual function for. And here we go. We've got a function. It exists to feed people and animals. There's also the implication that this is a peaceful and well-ordered world. It's not violent. There's a whole lot of debate and entire books written on the topic of whether or not people were eating meat back then. Was there bloodshed before the fall? Blah, blah, blah. That's, like I said, that's not the stuff I get into. What I see here is that everything God made had a purpose and that it was a peaceful and good world. It was functioning the way he designed. It was not broken or bad. All right, so let's wrap it up. Chapter 2, thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all the host of them. This is an interesting countercultural thing because all of that whole polytheistic gods thing that was everywhere, they didn't finish their work. That's why they made people, because they didn't want to finish their work because they were lazy. God values work and God completes what he sets out to do. And I wanted to bring this point up because if you look at, I believe it is Philippians 1:6, that verse says that, he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. And we can trust that because here in creation, he was faithful to complete it. He wasn't like these other gods in the other religions that just said, oh, this is too much work, I quit. He finishes what he starts. His word is true and faithful and powerful. And he gives purpose to everything. He brings order to the messes. It's gorgeous. I'm loving what this passage tells me about who God is. So finally, we're going to just end on day 7. God finished the work, he rested, and he made it holy because this is the day that he rested. Now, what does this really mean? Was he tired? No, he was not tired. I think there's two things going on here. One of the things is it's reinforcing this concept that his work of creation was done. He finished, and then he rested in it. So I think that's a very emphatic statement there. But there's a little more here. I believe that there's a sense in which God is looking at everything that he's created. It's all very good. And he is resting within that creation and saying, this is beautiful. This is good. It's kind of like the idea of when you sit back and you look at a beautiful art piece and you just appreciate it and you say, look at this thing I just did. I just painted this. This is great. Or you make a gourmet meal or you finish making a special pastry and you're just so proud of the work that you've done and you rest in that accomplishment. I think God's doing that here. He's resting in his accomplishment and it's sort of an additional statement that says it's good. It's good enough that he can sit back and relish it. So if I were to summarize all of this very quickly, what would I say that we've found? I think we've found that we have a single creator who is all-powerful, eternal, and good. And that he values creation and that he values us enough to place his image in us and to give us a role of dominion here. He finishes what he starts. His words have the power to accomplish what he sets out to do. And he is always pushing us towards our purpose, which is to bring him praise and to bring him glory. And finally, I want to bring out grace. We didn't deserve any of this. All these other gods in the ancient world, you didn't get gifts from them unless you gave them something first. It was like putting a deposit in a piggy bank and getting something back. It was an exchange, a transactional thing. You could bribe those gods to bless you. But our God's not like that. In fact, he blessed us before we ever asked. He blessed us before we did anything. We did not merit it. He planned to make us in his image before we even existed. That's grace. Completely unmerited favor. We had done nothing and there was no exchange or bribery. It was just like, here, look at this amazing place that I've made for you and look at this role I've given you. If you are feeling purposeless, if you're feeling like your life is missing order, if you feel like you're not being the person that you want to be, that you're falling short of a standard, the answer to all of that is that we reconnect with God, with Jesus, the very Word of God Himself, so that we can image Him, so that we can have purpose, so that our lives can be brought back into meaning and order, so that we can bring Him praise, and so that the illumination that Jesus brings can begin to help us properly reflect God instead of this broken halfway way that we do it all the time. There is a whole lot of stuff in there that I skipped. And you probably have questions. I bet you have questions on things that I skipped because I just did not have time to go into everything. So tell you what, put some questions down below. If you have any questions at all, topics from Genesis 1 that you would like me to cover, let me know and I will take a look at them, and I'll either cover them myself or provide resources for you to look at, because this is a rich, rich part of the Bible and there's just so much to be said. Have a good week.